Welcome to Inside Academia, the weekly program where we take a look behind the ivory curtain, seeking a frank discussion of American education. I'm your host, Andy Nash. My guest today is the president and co-founder of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, or otherwise known as ACTA, and is also formerly General Counsel for the National Endowment for the Humanities, Ms. Ann Neal. Welcome to Inside Academia. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andy.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your organization today that was founded back in 1995, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. There were many problems, as you know, plaguing higher education. Can you give us a little bit of background of what ACTA's mission is, what it does, why it was founded, and under what circumstances back in the mid-90s?
Yeah, as you say, we got founded back in 1995, and our focus was on the important transformative experience that a quality higher education can bring. We were essentially focused, and to this day remain focused, on three key areas: academic freedom, academic excellence, and accountability. And when back in 1995 we got founded, there were many of us who were concerned that some of the threats to academic excellence and accountability were actually coming from within the academy. And so it was our belief and hope that by mobilizing and informing alumni and trustees around the country, that we could help bring their informed perspective to bear on quality issues on our college campuses.
Okay, and how, can you be a little more specific? What exactly did ACTA do? What sort of problems did it identify, and what sort of tactics or strategies did it resort to address these issues that you say were from within the academy?
Well, as I've said, academic excellence is a key focus of our efforts. And one of the things we're concerned about is ensuring that colleges and universities graduate students who are equipped to be effective workers, lifelong learners, and informed citizens. And as we've looked at curricula around the country for the last 15 years, what we've found is in many places, schools are pledging to provide a coherent core curriculum, a strong general education for college students, but in fact, they're doing far from it. In fact, one of our major project areas, What Will They Learn, is looking at core curricula around the country. We've examined more than 700 institutions, private and public, large and small, across the country, and we've looked at what is typically referred to as general education. These are the areas that are designed to provide students with a broad general foundation, typically are taken in the first 2 years of the college experience, and they are in addition to what one takes in the major. Yeah. As we've looked at schools across the country, most of them will say in their catalogs and to parents and to students who are visiting, we promise to give your students a strong general education and a breadth of knowledge that will serve them after they graduate. And in fact, as we've looked, that is really far from the case. That most schools today have in place what is known as distribution requirements, so that students can pick and choose often from hundreds of courses, allowing them to graduate with vast gaps in their knowledge.
And many of these courses are disconnected and disjointed from one another so that they don't really get a comprehensive fundamental education, and they end up rather unproficient in many areas, and yet they are conferred with degrees after 4 or 5 years, after completing so many credits. So what does a group like ACTA do to offset that? I mean, what can you do as an external organization to, I guess, either lobby faculty or work with them to get them to reform these things?
We think one of the key areas is to inform parents, students, and policymakers of what really is happening on our college campuses. While we're spending billions of dollars each year in state and federal aid to our colleges and universities, we have discovered that they're remarkably non-transparent places. So one of our goals is, quite frankly, to provide parents and students with information that they can't get anywhere else. We are all very familiar with the famous U.S. News and World Report rankings, which does, in fact, year in, year out, provide families with information about schools across the country. But what U.S. News does is largely look at inputs, SAT scores, grade point averages, or they'll even look at, say, alumni giving. what we think needs to be done on college campuses across the country is to refocus really on education, not on reputation, not on whether or not the president thinks his school is good or another school down the road is good, but in fact, what is the value being added when a student goes to that college or university? And that's why we inaugurated whatwilltheylearn.com, and that's why we've chosen 7 key areas that we think are central to a broad general education to look at and to determine whether or not institutions across the country require them. Now, the areas that we look at are composition, because it's certainly our contention that all of us need to know how to write and convey our sentiments in an intelligent fashion. Intermediate foreign language knowledge, U.S. history or government, math, science. Typically, we prefer with a laboratory component, as well as economics. I hope I've given the 7
Sure.
that done. We look at those 7 and then we analyze whether or not a student is guaranteed to take at least one course in those fundamental areas that are designed to produce informed citizen. And what we found really is quite shocking. More than 60% of the institutions that we surveyed require 3 or fewer courses. When we look at the colleges and universities across the country, less than 5% require economics. And certainly you and I only have to look at the front page of the newspaper each and every day to know that economic issues, supply and demand, are very much issues that are on the forefront of today's news. And so we think, again, that this is really a sorry statement about our institutions across the country. Another remarkable fact is that 20% of colleges and universities we've surveyed, covering some more than 6 million students, 20% or less actually require U.S. government or history. And in a country that really relies on an informed citizenry, we think, again, that that's an area where our colleges and universities are shortchanging students and shortchanging the families that are paying for an education dearly.
Right. And also, if you consider the fact that you, as a student of a general university, getting that general education, you have to take so many credits, and you're paying quite an arm and a leg for many of those credits today, than more so than ever before, then you would want there to be some sort of comprehensiveness to it all, so that the institution truly lives up to the claim that we're making you a well-rounded individual. And that brings me to another point. Many scholars have pointed out recently, with the rising cost in tuition, that there is all the more of a consumerist-driven attitude toward education, particularly on the part of the students that are coming in, as well as their parents that are helping pay. And that attitude essentially bodes for the notion that, well, if I'm paying for all these courses, shouldn't I be able to take what I want, this and that and the next thing. So there seems to be an erosion. I don't know if you see the same thing, but there seems to be an erosion of the idea of core curriculum, of a centrally planned. And by centrally planned, I mean by a faculty senate or a faculty body of some kind, plotting out what the core curriculum will be for a student from start to finish, from freshman year to the end of their senior year. How do you see that, and do you think that with the skyrocketing cost of education, that's only serving to further erode that?
At the end of the day, we want our college graduates to come away with a comprehensive knowledge that will help them to be effective in life. And I think you're absolutely right. We are seeing stories of students who are graduating with massive debt and who have come away with smatterings of education because our colleges and universities are doing very little to direct them to what they need to know. I think you put your finger on it, that we see often this mentality that students are paying a lot, shouldn't they be able to pick and choose whatever they want? And I guess our argument is that one can pick and choose whatever one wants easily at the library, and one can do that for free.
Right.
And that if, in fact, you've got students paying easily $200,000 over 4 years if they're going to some of the high-end private institutions, that isn't it the responsibility of the institution and the adults who have been trained for many, many years to direct students to what they need to know? And our ultimate conclusion is that colleges and universities have very much abdicated that responsibility. I think too often faculty teach what they're interested in teaching as opposed to what students need to learn. And one of the overriding goals of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni is to try to refocus institutions on their primary purpose, which is not to give a climbing wall, not to have all sorts of wonderful amenities, but in fact to provide students with rigorous quality education that the informed adults who are at the institutions have been educated to offer. And we think these kinds of curricular choices need to be made, that trustees can call upon administrators and faculty at their institutions to make these kinds of judgments so that students come away with something more than a random grab bag of courses that really don't amount to anything.
Well, you know, it's funny when they parade the parents and the new prospective students through the campus, showing them what the campus looks like. It bodes well for the institution to say, look, we have all these pretty new buildings and rec facilities and computer labs. It's like an arms race where they have to keep up with the Joneses because the other state U next door is going to do it if they don't. And it's like the kid in the candy store, and you say, look, come on in and look at all these things, and it's for the low, low price of anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 a year. But getting back to the point of education, though, I mean, and there's a bargain in all this, as you know, that students need to live up to as well. Many of them don't challenge their professors. Many professors, and especially adjuncts, who are, by the way, being relied upon by the administrators to teach more and more students, they don't have tenure. They don't have any role protection. And a lot of their decision to be rehired rests on everything from student evaluations to all sorts of other externalities. And a lot of those evaluations end up resting upon whether or not students like the professor, not whether or not they truly learn something. So in the climate of mediocrity or minimalism, when Johnny was, passed along, the can was kicked yet again. He got through 11th grade, 12th grade, and now he's in college. The first level English instructor, who's a grad student at the lower level, passes the student along. By the time he gets to third or fourth year, he's taking an upper level class. Professor is looking at his paper, and he's like, he can't even write. What is he supposed to do? And so where in this mess do you start reforming the process?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a two-way street. On the one hand, we expect the adults on campus to help direct students to what they need to know. They shouldn't be forced to have a do-it-yourself curriculum for $50,000 a year. But on the other hand, we do expect students to bring academic seriousness to the case at hand. And there are certainly many, many recent surveys which have documented that students are studying very little. A recent study by two professors, Aram and Roxa, called Academically Adrift, documented that 51% of students' time was basically spent socializing. And so in that particular study, they further documented that within the first 2 years of their college experience, less than 45% actually showed any cognitive growth. And within 4 years, 36% only showed cognitive growth.
Now, is that any worse than, say, 20 years ago, in your opinion?
I dare say that as we look at the college schedule, that students are studying less and doing less than it used to be.
Okay.
You can certainly find today students who will go to class starting on Tuesdays. Their last class will be on Thursday. In decades ago, you could be assured that there were classes on Friday, often on Saturday, and certainly on Monday. But the college schedule has now, in too many ways, been drawn to accommodate faculty who like to teach in the middle of the week. And we think that it has a direct bearing, really, on the culture that we find on college campuses. There are numerous stories of binge drinking, and as we see it, this is in large part a byproduct of an academic calendar that allows students to finish on Thursday and not start up again until Tuesday. Is it any wonder that they then fill their time with socializing and college drinking? And of course, we've also documented in our study on grade inflation a pretty rampant practice on college campuses where students with very minimal work are finding themselves with an A. You were talking about student evaluations. It's certainly our contention that student evaluations can often lead to grade inflation because professors have long learned that their promotion or even their tenure can be dependent upon students giving them positive evaluations. Right. And so professors naturally then try to provide a classroom that makes them liked by the students.
Sure.
And so you have a whole medley of these trends on campus, which I then think create less than serious academic culture, and obviously then students spending a lot and not necessarily getting a lot.
So if you're the Council of Trustees and Alumni, are you more positioning your group as a resource for trustees who have the ultimate decision-making power of how to change their institutions, or how do you position yourself as a reform agent to any more facets of the university, be it faculty, administration, or parents?
Well, as I say, we like to provide information to public and to the students so that they can actually find out what is happening on a college campus. So our first and primary resource is whatwilltheylearn.com. I hope that the viewers will go to that website, where it is possible for you to see what does the school require in terms of those 7 core subjects that I talked about. You can find what the school itself says is its academic philosophy and determine whether or not they are living up to it. We also provide data on the tuition as well as the graduation rates. And I think that is a particular area of focus for many these days. We're spending so much money on higher education, and in fact, we are looking at 6-year graduation rates, which are less than 60%. And when I tell that to parents and these days, they are just absolutely shocked that what used to be a 4-year college degree is now a 6+ college degree. And quite frankly, that's got to change, and that's something that trustees need to be focusing on, and that ACTA is directing trustees to focus on through our report card series.
Many public universities, whether they are run by the state or not, are typically that rely on whatever degree of public subsidy and public appropriation for whatever size of their budget, will argue that to the extent to which their appropriations are cut from their respective states, that they thereby have to raise tuition necessarily upwards of anywhere from 5 to 10 or more percent. It's very difficult to really extrapolate that from the university budgets that are published online. It's very difficult to assess to what extent general funds monies that are tuition and public dollars go to offsetting non-undergraduate educational expenses. What is your response, having done all the research and providing all the information to parents and prospective students? How do you reply to these claims administrators make that our budget cut from the state is what's causing us to raise tuition by 10%?
We basically say we don't believe that. And in fact, I know right in the state of Pennsylvania right now, this debate is going on where the governor is attempting to find ways to cut because the Commonwealth is having the same problems that so many states around the country are having in terms of serious deficits that they have got to address. And I know that there have been any number of higher ed administrators who argue that if you cut, we must raise our tuition. And we're simply saying that just isn't right. If you look at Penn State, for instance, from about 2001 till 2011, even though they were getting $3.5 billion in state aid, tuition doubled during that time. So that hardly would support. Yes, so that would hardly support the idea that give us more money and we won't raise tuition. We also believe that the economic downturn, while of course it is tragic for many, many families, also has a silver lining. And that is our colleges and universities really have an opportunity to sit down and get back to basics as they are being asked to share the cuts that families are finding across the country, that here is an opportunity for them to say to ourselves, what do we do well? What do we do poorly? For instance, we're talking about a core curricula. Today we can find students picking and choosing from hundreds of courses. There are definite cost consequences. And so if you look at Emory as by way of example, there are more than 600 courses that students can choose from for a humanities requirement. There are ways, and there are ways available right now for colleges and universities to streamline, to provide a much more directed choice for students, and they will benefit because of reducing costs. We, in fact, have a special brochure called Cutting Costs that we've made available available to trustees across the country, designed to show them ways that they can take the economic challenges that they currently face to find greater productivity, to find greater efficiencies. And so we think that the claim that, well, we've got to raise tuition, that's the only option we have, is fundamentally wrong. And it's higher ed essentially saying we won't do what families are having to do. We just want more, no questions asked.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have. Ms. Neal, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today on Inside Academia.
Thanks so much.
You're quite welcome. Again, President of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, Ms. Ann Neal. This has been Inside Academia with Andy Nash. Check us out again on InsideAcademia.tv and join us next week as every week as we take you for a look behind the ivory curtain.